Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Louise Walsh, the CEO of the Future Generation Companies, FGX and FGG. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people on whose land we are meeting today and acknowledge the elders past and present. So how many people are not shareholders in FGX or FGG? Just a show of hands, quick show of hands. Okay. So for those of you that are, just bear with me for a few minutes while I just talk a little bit about the background and how these companies work. Firstly, just a disclaimer, but we don't really need to read that, or if you do, you can read it later. But just how these two companies work. These are two listed investment companies that were founded by Jeff Wilson, and they were founded in 2014 for FGX, which is for investors that are interested in investing in Australian equities. And the sister company, FGG, Future Generation Global, was listed in 2015. Now, these two companies have exactly the same model. What they're doing is delivering a dual objective to our shareholders or investors. So they're delivering an investment return, but also a social return. And how this came about is, it's really by pure chance. Jeff was actually on holidays in London about 7 years ago. He was sitting in a hotel having breakfast with his wife and he was reading the Financial Times. I don't think he's ever on holidays and he wouldn't read the AFR or the Financial Times or the equivalent Wall Street Journal. Anyway, he was reading away and he read about an investment vehicle in London called the Battle Against Cancer Investment Trust. And in short, a hedge fund manager in London had raised some capital for investors. He'd approached a group of best performing hedge fund managers in the UK, in London, and he'd convinced those hedge fund managers to manage money in their main funds without charging any fees. So no performance fees and no management fees. And this trust or this company was donating 1% of its assets to charity. Jeff loved the model. And in fact, he went to see Tom Henderson, the hedge fund manager, when he was in London, quizzed him, interrogated him about it and said, on the plane on the way back to Sydney, that is something that I would love to do in Australia. And hence, FGX was born in 2014. And literally 1 year later, based on the success of the IPO for FGX, when 200 million was raised from investors and it was oversubscribed, a lot of investors said to us, I'm underweight in global equities, would you do something similar for global equities? And FGG was born 12 months later. So with these companies today, we have assets of over $1 billion. And we started with 200 and 300 million for FGG, so 500 million after the two IPOs. So it's quite exciting how quickly they've grown, and FGX will celebrate its 5th birthday in September this year, and FGG will celebrate its 4th birthday. The plan is actually to grow these companies to something like $3 billion combined assets by 2027. So it gives you an idea of where we're heading and I suppose the KPIs for me as the CEO. So what we're planning on doing in this update presentation this afternoon is firstly, I'll give you a short update on the two companies, primarily looking at the investment update of the two companies as well as what's happening on the charitable side of the business. I'll also then ask two of our charity representatives to join me on stage for a conversation. So firstly, you're going to hear from Kirsty Lucas, and Kirsty is an ambassador for Diabetes Kids Fund, which is part of Diabetes New South Wales and ACT. And Diabetes Kids Fund is one of our chosen charities in FGX. Then we'll have a conversation with Mitch Doyle, and Mitch is an ambassador for Butterfly Foundation for Eating Disorders. And that's one of our charities, our chosen charities in FGG. Once we finish that conversation, we'll open it up to questions from the floor, and Jeff Wilson will join us for that conversation. And then, of course, you'll be able to have lunch. And I know you're very patient for waiting for those excellent sandwiches that the Western puts on. So hopefully this will give you a comprehensive update on where the two companies are at. So firstly, if we take a look at, importantly, performance, because with these companies, first and foremost, this is about achieving investment objectives, first and foremost, for our shareholders. So if we take a look firstly at FGG, the global company, I should mention that it had a very strong 12 months to 31 December, where it outperformed the index, the MSCI index, by 5.9%, which we were very proud of as a very strong result. With FGX, it's outperformed the index by 2.3% since inception in September 14. Now, it has been a tough time, particularly with all of the volatility, as everyone will recognise. But what we're trying to do with these companies is they're not designed to shoot the lights out. What they are designed to do is really ride through periods when you have volatility like this, and to do that well. And speaking of the volatility, just so you can see here, you can see some figures with FGX, it's 7.5% for the volatility versus the market's 11.1%. Now that figure, the investment committee of FGX, which is chaired by Jeff, they're actually very happy about how low that volatility is. Now, if I make a comment on FGG, which is currently at 8.5% versus the index's 9.8%, that's probably not as low as we would like, and we'd be the first and foremost to admit that. So one of the big KPIs for that investment committee is actually to try and reduce that volatility, because that's very important that we keep it as low as we possibly can. If we take a look at the net tangible assets and how that's progressing, here you can see with FGG, it is trading in line with NTA. I think the share price, when I looked before I came up on stage, was about 138, or it has been 138. It closed there last night. With FGX, it's trading at a very, very slight discount at the moment. I think it was 119 before I came up on stage. Now, I just want to make a comment about FGX because it has been trading at a discount for about 4 weeks. And one of the reasons for that, and the main reason for that, and we've done the research, we've done the drill down to see why that's happening, was because, A, there's volatility, but more importantly, most of our shareholders are self-managed super funds. 50%, actually a bit over the 50% are self-managed super funds, 30% high net worth families, family offices, philanthropic foundations, large charities, and 20% are mum and dad investors. But the self-managed super funds, there was some buying that was happening in the last month, some selling that was happening in the last month. And the main reason for that was self-managed super funds being scared about the proposed change in the franking credit policy that was proposed by the Labor opposition. And of course, we know that's redundant now. We know what happened on Saturday night, which was an incredible result. And so what's happened is that share price has since rallied. So the good news is that it has rallied, and obviously, you know, our aim is to keep them trading at a small premium. You know, we'd love to be at sort of 5 to 6% premium to NTA. So that's you know, we're on track with that, and we really believe that we can achieve this post the election result on Saturday night. With the dividends, you can see here the difference in the two companies at 4.6 cents per share, fully franked, versus the 1 cent for FGG. And again, I should just emphasise here that with FGG, the dividend will always be lower than the likes of FGX. And the reason for that is, with FGG, of course, we've got a number of global fund managers that are managing money pro bono for us in FGX. And some of those fund managers are actually domiciled overseas. So they're actually based overseas, they're subject to different tax and legal structures. And as a result of that, of course, the dividend relies on distributions from those fund managers. And in the case of FGG, we're not picking up distributions from some of those fund managers because they're domiciled offshore. So we sort of like to stress that it's important with FGG that our shareholders and potential shareholders know that that stock is very much about a capital growth investment. The number one investment objective doesn't tend to be the increasing stream of fully franked dividends, like it is for FGX. So we just want to be upfront with that so people know about that. So now taking a look at the other side of the business, the social returns, because with this model, due to the generosity of the fund managers in both companies, we're able to donate 1% of the net tangible assets, the assets of the company, each year to charity. So what's incredible is that in less than 5 years, we've donated already $21.1 million, which is an incredibly large sum of money, particularly in the context of Australia and giving or philanthropy. So you can see the figures from the last financial year. It was 7.9 million that was donated. Now what's interesting is that donation this year will increase to approximately 10 million this year. So that means come September, October this year, the donation in total since inception will actually be $31.1 million or thereabouts. Now the reason for the jump this year is because we had successful capital raisings for both companies towards the end of last year. And we raised 128 million via a share purchase plan and a placement for FGG, which was very successful. And we raised 53 million for FGX. Now, I'll just make a comment here that what was interesting about the capital raisings is that, and I remember the dates very clearly, the placement for FGG happened on the 12th of October, Friday the 12th of October. And if any of you have got very good memories, you'll remember that the volatility, the severe volatility started on the 11th of October. So it couldn't have been worse timing if you tried. I mean, Jeff and I were doing our numbers earlier that week, and he said, Louise, we will max it out. We will do the maximum amount that we can do with the placement and the share purchase plan. And unfortunately, because of that timing, we didn't quite do the max, obviously. The max would have been, I think, 180, to 190, something like that. Now, with FGX, it was challenging because what happened is, as I said, the volatility started on the 11th. And interesting enough, we actually announced that we were doing the capital raising for FGX on Monday, the 8th of October. So we knew once that volatility started that it would be incredibly difficult to raise large sums of money with this capital raising, but we definitely wanted to see through the raising. And I love this quote from Jeff. I mean, if we can save one life, then it's all been worthwhile. And interestingly enough, in Brisbane on Tuesday, we heard from the parents of a young woman who suffers from severe depression and has definitely had suicidal threats. And the parents said on stage that it's already happened. It's already happened because this young woman, because of the work of Kids Helpline, her life has been saved. And in fact, more than once in the last few years. So that was incredibly powerful. And I thank you as shareholders for investing and trusting in us that we can make a difference to young people. Now, the year ahead, just some priorities for this year. Now, we're not looking at doing capital raisings in the short term, in the next year or two. That also depends on the market, but we obviously did them late last year, and you don't want to be doing those too often. We definitely, as a given, would like these two companies to be trading at a small premium to net tangible assets. That's a given. But just a couple of other priorities. So we've just completed a very extensive review of the 22 charities, the recipient charities that both companies support. So we have 14 charities in children and youth at risk that are supported through FGX. We also have 8 charities that are youth mental health related that are supported through FGG. So we've used an external provider to help us do a very extensive review of all 22 charities. And the results have just been presented to the FGX board on last Friday, and FGG we did yesterday. We've actually had audit and board meetings in the middle of the roadshow, and this is the last day of the roadshow, so I don't think that's ever going to happen again. I think the dates of the roadshow actually change, but it's been a comprehensive exercise and a review that we really felt was needed to be done, because we are coming up to the 5th anniversary of FGX and the 4th anniversary of FGG, and we want to make sure that those charitable dollars, because they're very, very significant, that they are well spent. And that's important, that the charities are accountable, transparent, that we can actually see a measurable impact on where the charitable dollars are going. Because if you think about it, by 2027, if the companies are at a combined assets of $3 billion, the annual donation will be $30 million a year. And obviously, it'll keep increasing as the assets grow. And these companies will be operating in perpetuity. There'll be funding in these two cause areas. We'll all be gone, and there'll still be funding in those areas. So it's really important that we get that side of the business right. The other priority for this year is a new marketing strategy. We've really felt strongly this year that one of the things we need to do is to simplify the messaging of what these companies are all about. We've got two very similar companies, similar names, similar logos. We've got Wilson Asset Management helping us, working behind the scenes, doing a lot of the back-end support. But one of the things we know from feedback over the last 4 or so years is that a lot of people find it very confusing how these companies work. Now, if you're a shareholder, I'm assuming you've worked it out. And if you're an advisor, you certainly should know how these companies work and how the model works. But we do find that some people find it a little bit confusing. Some people say to me, oh, is that a charitable donation? And I say, definitely not. This is first and foremost about an investment opportunity, but there is a dual purpose going on. There is this social return, but the investment returns are not compromised. We're actually going into the main fund of a fund manager. We have a diversified portfolio with a number of fund managers. And in a lot of cases, the investor's getting access to fund managers that typically their funds are actually closed. So they're not open to retail investors. But there is a lot of confusion out there. So if you're staying on, and I encourage you to stay on for the investment forum, you'll see a video at the start of that investment forum, which is one of our first attempts to simplify the message. The fact sheets that are in your new show bags there, that is another attempt as well. So from here on in, you'll probably hear us more refer to the companies as the future generation companies. They'll still have their own entities and their own logos, but they are essentially the same model, but one's Australian equities and one is global equities. So there's a number of things we're doing that will spin off as a result of that marketing strategy. Now, the other thing we're looking to do is to get involved in advocacy. Because we're going to be a big funder in the non-profit sector, and particularly in that area of youth mental health, to me it is the health problem of our time. And we have a chance here to actually be a voice, to actually create a platform where we can actually encourage more funders, more corporates, more donors, more philanthropists, and government to actually do more in this space, and also agitate even with government to actually fix the problem. I mean, one issue is that the system is broken. You talk to any experts in this space, the numbers are actually getting worse. They're actually not getting better. So we are looking at working with one of the big professional service firms. It will probably be EY, Ernst & Young. And we're looking at developing a policy paper, and we'll be releasing that later this year. And we expect to be out there in the community speaking about the issues and try to see if we can get some change, and not just talking about the investment opportunity. So stay tuned for that one. So now what I'd like to do is, wait a minute, yeah, here we go. Before I start the panel, I'd like to sincerely thank these fund managers. I mean, there is an incredible amount of generosity going on here. We had all of these fund managers at Magellan a fortnight ago, and we had a fabulous event where we talked to them about the priorities for the company, some of the ways that they can get more involved, how they can leverage their association with the future generation companies. And these guys really, really love being involved in what we're doing. So we can't thank them enough, and I sincerely mean that. And later on at 1:45, you'll hear from 9 of our best performing fund managers in this group, where they're actually going to each present a stock pick idea, and then we'll have Hamish Douglas on stage. I mean, really the rock star of funds management in Australia, being interviewed for about half an hour with Tony Boyd, and that's a bit of a luxury for us to actually hear him live doing that type of presentation. These are also the service providers. So these businesses are behind the scenes. They're doing a huge amount of work to make sure that we keep the costs of the companies right down. These businesses are all acting either pro bono or with heavily discounted fees for the benefit of the future generation companies. I should point out Wilson Asset Management, because the amount of generosity from Jeff Wilson, Kate Thorley and the team at WAM is actually quite incredible. I'm actually the only paid employee of the two companies. My salary is split three ways. The companies fund a third each, WAM funds a third, and of the 32 staff at WAM, about 12 of them work on these two companies with me. So there's two full-time finance managers who work exclusively on these companies that sit inside the WAM finance team, and WAM actually pays their salary. So I do want to certainly acknowledge that. Another one that's not here, the logo's not even on the screen, is the ASX. They just quietly wanted to do it, but they've actually waived their annual listing fees. So we're the only two companies listed on the ASX that are not paying annual listing fees. So again, thank you very much to these businesses. And I know there's representatives in the audience here from each of these businesses. And finally, just to give you a size, an idea of the size of the fees that are foregone. Here you can see the total fees foregone since inception of $41.2 million. So that's the fees that are foregone by the fund managers, but also by the service providers. And most of that figure is coming from the fund managers. And even in the last 12 months, that figure is 12.9%. So that 41.2, of course, well and truly outweighs the 21.1 million, which is the donation to charity. Essentially, it's double. So there's, again, a huge amount of generosity. And we would not be here today if there wasn't that generosity existing from the fund managers. So now what I'd like to do is bring up our two panellists. So firstly, Kirsty and also Mitch. And we've just got a few chairs, and we're just going to have a bit of a conversation to interview a couple of our charities so you can see on that side of the business how things all work. Now, first what we might do is I think we'll show a short video first from Diabetes Kids Funds before we have a chat to Kirsty.
It was unexpected. I thought she had gastro and was just dehydrated, to be completely honest. And the second they pricked her finger and that number came up on the monitor, my heart. I still can't think about that day without crying. Anyway, so as soon as that number came up, I just knew. I knew exactly what it was.
The things I don't like about type 1 diabetes is doing the finger pricks, because sometimes they hurt, but sometimes I just don't want to do it.
Thanks to a Diabuddies New South Wales and ACT camp and Diabuddies days, Molly has a friend who understands exactly what she's going through, because she is living with diabetes too. All children deserve a happy childhood. Please donate now to make life easier for people living with diabetes.
Great. So thank you very much, Kirsty, for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
And that was fantastic to have both of you actually featuring in the video as well. So can you tell us a bit about the journey with Molly and, when it all started with diabetes?
Okay, so it started 2 years ago. It was a horrible twist of fate. It was Mother's Day.
Oh.
I didn't know you were showing that.
Oh,
so
sorry.
it's coming. Anyway, it was unexpected. And she was unconscious for 18 hours and in ICU, but we caught it and it's good. But since that time, the first 6 months were met with so much misunderstanding and misconception about what type 1 actually is. There is a lot of confusion that it is brought on by, themselves, or something I've done wrong or something she's done wrong. People don't understand that it is an autoimmune condition that cannot be cured. and it is there for life, and exactly how life-threatening it is. I mean, I think if I look back over the 2 years and the amount of hypos she's had, I can easily say I saved my daughter's life probably about 400 times. So it's big.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's incredibly brave of you to speak. And can you tell us a bit about? I mean, obviously, you've become involved now as an ambassador for Diabetes New South Wales and Diabetes Kids Fund. I mean, how did that relationship start?
It started because Molly was feeling very isolated. The invitations to birthday parties stopped, to sleepovers stopped, because people just felt, that one, because it was, she had antibodies. Oh my goodness, my child's going to catch it from her, so we can't have her near our children. Too scared that, they would be the cause of her dying in her sleep. And they just were unaware. They were just very, very scared. So that was the first part. But then it was the constant removal from the classroom and having to go to the office because, she felt low or she felt high, or the school were just wanting to put into place certain routines to make sure she was safe. And I am so grateful to her school for being so proactive. But it created an image that she was abnormal and not normal. And her friendships group started to sort of waver because she was missing that time with them, and she did. Her isolation and her sense of loneliness grew. So I reached out to find a way for her to find some friends that understood, and that's when I found Diabetes Kids Fund.
And can you tell us a little bit about Diabetes New South Wales and what it does and what this funding means to the organisation as well?
This funding has been instrumental in many ways, and one of the biggest things that they've been able to achieve is a government understanding and a government change and a government pledge. So as a result of the donations and the formation of the Kids Fund, Diabetes New South Wales are able to implement educational programs for teachers so that parents aren't having to give up their jobs and go and treat their children and give them needles 3 times a day at school, that schools felt comfortable about caring for these children and looking after them, and therefore the absentee rate dropped and the amount of time in the classroom was maximised, and they could maximise their learning, and their confidence grew because they weren't missing out on fundamentals. And as a result of these things, the government recognised and went, you know what, these educational programs which were developed as a direct result from your funding are so important that they have now said we need to take this to a national educational program, and they're funding it. And that's because of your vision and your assistance and the work of Diabetes New South Wales that it's now going national. So
Fantastic.
that is just one thing. The other is in their diabetes programs, which are day programs, which include anyone in the type 1 community with children and their entire family, not just the child with diabetes, but they know the importance of the siblings being made to feel special as well, and allowing connections to happen. Connections between the children to find someone that understands what they're going through, but also parents. So we can talk and cry.
Yeah. No, you've done amazingly well, I have to say. Fantastic. And just one last question. How's Molly now? Like, how are things in your household?
I have 4 children, so it's crazy.
4 children. I think
4
you've got
children.
twins as well.
I do, the youngest are twins. And it's noisy, it's messy, it's loud. It feels like a normal family because she's happy and she's confident, and she's thrown herself into her music, and she's got her friends now that understand, and she can get on FaceTime, and oh my God, I feel so, I can't get these sugars down, and Mum's on my back, and I've got to do this, and her friend comes back and says the same thing, and it's okay. So she's happy to get up in the mornings now, and she's happy to go to school, and she knows, I have this. It is horrible, but it's not going to stop me anymore because I know I have my support. So that's what it's done for her.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much. Good on you. what I'd now like to do is show the video for Butterfly Foundation first.
Eating disorders affect 1 in 11 people during their lifetime, and they have the highest morbidity rate of any of the mental illnesses.
I think there is still that myth that people choose to have an eating disorder and they don't do that.
They're severe and complex and require multidisciplinary support and treatment to enable recovery. Sadly, less than 25% of Australians living with an eating disorder are currently undergoing treatment.
It's only now you realise that they're not doing it to themselves. It is an illness. It's a condition that's it's a horrid thing.
The Butterfly Foundation is Australia's peak body for eating disorders and body image issues. Every day we strive to represent the voices of more than 1 million Australians living with an eating disorder and the people who care for them. Butterfly runs the only national helpline to support people living with an eating disorder 7 days a week, and every year we take over 14,000 calls. Early intervention and prevention are critical to minimise the impact and longevity of eating disorders. We therefore run positive body image workshops in schools and workplaces to address negative body image issues before they become a more serious concern.
Getting the support now, even after they've recovered, has been highly beneficial for me. You don't need to be a parent or someone who is necessarily in charge of the nutritional side of things. It still impacts you, and you want to help this person the best way that you can.
While our sessions are safe, supportive, practical and recovery focused. As the peak body for lived experience of eating disorders, we have a strong online community and a powerful media presence, every day helping to raise awareness about body image and eating disorders.
Thank you. Okay, Mitch, welcome to the stage. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you for having me here.
And could you share with us your journey with an eating disorder? And I was talking to Mitch beforehand because I said, there's probably people in the audience that'll be thinking, wow, I can't believe there's a male up here who's got eating disorders. But tell us a little bit about that, because the numbers are quite high with young males as well.
Absolutely. So, and, my eating disorder kind of began when I was 11 years old. So from when I was a very young age, and kind of existed for a better part of 14 years. It started very much in the schoolyard when I was bullied about my appearance, when I was bullied about my weight by a group of young boys. I didn't fit the mold on what it meant to be a young boy. I wasn't interested in sport. I didn't want to play footy or soccer or what any of the other boys wanted to play. I was much more creative and those kind of things. And that kind of became a target for those people to kind of have a dig. And, I hadn't shot up through puberty or adolescence, so I was nowhere near as tall as I am now. So I had my baby weight on me, but that was, being a kid in the schoolyard with a little bit of extra weight on it, it's conditioned into us that that's abnormal. And we've demonized the word fat for a number of years. And I think that's what kind of plays into these bullying behaviors at such a young age. And it started to transition into an obsession over what I was eating, and an obsession over exercise, and an obsession over the way that I looked. And I looked in the mirror, and for 14 years I hated what stared back at me. And that led to a number of very damaging behaviors for both my psychological health and my physical health. It was very damaging on my family. It ripped through the family at a rapid pace, like wildfire. My parents, they didn't know what to do. They took me to a doctor who said, put the weight back on or you go to hospital. And that was it, because the GP at that time didn't have an understanding on what eating disorders were, and particularly in a male. So it was a very shock therapy kind of way of putting the weight back on, which, at 11 years old seemed to scare me out of some of the behaviors. But had I had psychological intervention at that young age, I don't think it would have spurred on to what it did in my late teens and early 20s, which was much more destructive and much more harrowing. And I just remember dark times of existing and not living. It was waking up and being on autopilot and having something stare back at me that I hated. I saw things in the mirror that didn't actually exist. I saw weight that wasn't there. It got to the point where I would cry over drinking water,
Wow.
feeling that water was the enemy.
Wow, okay.
So it was incredibly damaging on my physical health and, both on my family and my friends, and I lost friends over it. And it was just such a harrowing journey to go through.
And what was the turning point for you? Like, can you pinpoint that?
I think the turning point for me was recognizing that it was a problem, recognizing that this isn't a normal way of living, and kind of knowing that I needed support. And as a male, that's always something that's very difficult to do, because it has been heavily programmed into our mentality that men or young boys reaching out for help is a sign of weakness. But I can definitely speak for myself now that that was the most courageous and brave thing that I've ever done in my life, because had I not done that, I would not be sitting up here today. And a big turning point was finding a psychologist who would take the time with me and treat me like a person, not a disorder. It was very much a separation that I am not an eating disorder. I was experiencing one, and going through many of the things that fueled those behaviors around food. I think there's a misconception that eating disorders are just about not eating what's on your plate or being quite restrictive. It is a lot of underlying psychological distress that you go through around self-worth and lovability and belonging and all of these kind of things. A lot of the focus of our sessions was around, you're a worthwhile human being and you deserve all these things. So until you start to unpack those underlying drives, you're never going to kind of succeed at kind of being able to beat the illness.
And what's life like for you now? You look pretty healthy to me.
Yeah.
Because you've definitely got it together.
Yes, very. I would say that I've been recovered for over nearly coming on 5 years now.
Right.
And it is, I have a thirst and passion again for life, and a passion for all the things that I felt that was robbed from me from a young age. And, my teens and my early 20s were very much a state of distress, and I feel like I'm making up for lost time with that. So, I'm going really well with uni, and I'm studying psychology, and I'm working for the Butterfly Foundation and working towards things that, I want to see change in this space, because I think stories from experience are such a powerful way at destroying stigma and encouraging more people to come forward with their issues.
Well, it's fantastic that you're working for Butterfly as well. So how does the role work, and what are you doing in your role for Butterfly? So
my role is, and I'm very lucky to be in the role that I am, it's essentially helping others to share their story and to find people around the country who are recovered and who want to share their experience with others, because they want to stop people going through what they went through, and really harnessing the power of their lived experience to create change in that space. And I'm incredibly humbled to get to speak with so many young people and people from different ages, different gender, different ethnicities about their eating disorder experience, because we've managed to, as a culture, box it into it being a young female thing. But the more stories that I hear from people is that misconception is very damaging and absolutely nowhere near the truth. Fantastic. And just one final question. Is there any advice for anyone sitting out there who knows someone who does have an eating disorder? Because I have a couple of instances that I know of, and it's incredibly crippling, as you've talked about. But sometimes people who know these people just don't know what to do. They're at their wits' end. I mean, have you any suggestions? Hold on. It's a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of the recovery journey, and know the power of very simple things. Connection. A lot of people, particularly when they're caring for someone with an eating disorder, they want to fix the problem. They want a silver bullet or a magic pill, but we know those don't exist and they take time. So if you're caring for someone or you know someone with an eating disorder, take time for yourself. I think self-care is incredibly important in those respects, but also know just the power of being with someone and sitting with someone and not having the answers, but just supporting them through that. And knowing that there are resources out there available to assist those people. It's something that we're very well aware of, and there are support services available like Butterfly and the National Helpline and stuff like that. They're available there for people going through those kind of situations of, I don't really know what to do yet. I don't know whether I should intervene, but simply asking someone, are you okay? Can I help you in any way? That's, again, a demonstration that you care for that person and that you're willing to be there with them through that journey. And listen, I know I said it was the last question, but one I forgot to ask you is,
Just talk to us about the male phenomena and, you know, what are the stats? Is it increasing? I mean, I know there's such an obsession with young males now about body image. I mean, we've always had that with young girls, there's no question. But, of course, it's increasingly so with young males. I mean, can you talk to us just about the male?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my last reading of research, and this may have changed, but I believe it was 1 in 5 new cases of an eating disorder diagnosis is in males. And I think we only need to look around, you know, what's happening in our culture with a very big emphasis on looks and a very big emphasis on fitness, gym culture. That is a particularly big thing in males. You know, this desire to buff up or bulk or shred or all of these kind of things is very front of mind for people. But for me, growing up, I had no role model to say that a male had gone through it. You know, all I had to base my experience off was Britney Spears or Lindsay Lohan or the Olsen twins or anything that was kind of published on a New Idea magazine or something like that, because it has been heavily tabloid kind of stories around what eating disorders were. They're branded on the front of magazines as almost a fad, and we know that that's not the case. So to grow up as a young male, it was very challenging. So I bared the weight of the illness, and I bared the weight of the stigma and the shame that I'm a male experiencing this. Does that make me any less masculine than my brothers, my dad? So there was a kind of comorbidity of a number of different things, and a depression and anxiety around that of, you know, what is this actual experience? And one of my roles with Butterfly is I get to go out to schools and talk to young people, and these issues are very much, they're not gendered.
No.
You know, young boys are saying, you know, I don't like the way that I look. My young nephew is 5 years old, and whenever I visit him, he's always wanting to do push-ups and look a certain way. And I'm like, just be innocent and go out there and scrape your knees and be a kid. But young people, both boys and girls, have so much pressure on them to look a certain way. And most of the images that they're basing these comparisons off are not realistic. They've gone through a long line of filtering and a long line of photoshopping.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it in my context. My husband and I don't have kids, but, you know, I've got quite a few nieces and nephews. Sorry, I've only got one nephew. And interestingly enough, I think he's more obsessed about what you're talking about than the girls are. So it's something we definitely have to watch and address. So thanks to the two of you for sharing your stories now. Good on you.